Hi, and well, good morning, everyone. It's early here. And as I said, I'm trying very much to finish this webinar commentary on the rays and the initiations. We're as far as page 741 when we've finished the major text, and now there are some other writings which are attached. So this is Rays and Initiations webinar commentary. It's part 2 and program 104. So this was written in February of 1949, and it says, "You, that is AAB, the Tibetan is speaking, have asked me what I considered the most important and significant events from the spiritual angle at this present time, a question we might well ask even today. The question highlights a theme which is exceedingly apposite, following as it does upon what I have just given anent the great renunciation and its consequent revelation, or as the Christian churches call them, the crucifixion and the resurrection. Obviously, the terminology of the Christian churches is not quite the same as that of the Tibetan. It's the great renunciation for him, then the ascension or decision, and then the resurrection, followed by the great transition and the refusal, about which, of course, nothing is yet written in our usual religions. The Christian resurrection is, however, from the angle of the Great Lodge on Sirius, only a minor one and a passing resurrection, though the revelation subsequently accorded is lasting and permanent in its effects. I suppose a rising out of not only the body and personality, but of the causal body and its limitations. So it's not even really an initiation per se in the series of initiations which Master DK gives, but it is there is a revelation that comes with that, and of course the very next if I didn't say it before, the very next initiation is the revelation. I may have somehow not included that. There are 5 great spiritual events in which all humanity is today sharing, and 2 which will take place later when the first 5 have established their effects. You know, usually planes and events are divided into 5 and then 2. The 2 are truly esoteric and the 5 more exoteric. It's the difference between Brahma, which is the exoteric, and then we have Vishnu and Shiva, the esoteric. Now these events are based upon a forced and not a spontaneous renunciation, as is the case in the true experience of the renunciation initiation. We do find in the causal body or egoic lotus that there are certain sacrificial events which occur, and not all of them are chosen. In the beginning, they are forced. They will lead, nevertheless, to a revelation which is imminent in its dawning and which will confront humanity before so very long. Now, interestingly enough, the revelation follows the crucifixion, and a lesser revelation follows humanity's forced renunciation. There is a parallelism there. And when we manage to give up that which is not needed and that which is lesser for that which is greater, then because we are increasingly unencumbered, revelation comes. With sacrifice, with renunciation comes the rending of the veils and the lifting of the veils. The war of 1914 to 45 is over. Its aftermath of suffering, famine, selfish reaction, suspicion, and unseemly struggle for supremacy is equally as bad as the past war. Well, we had certainly the quest for dominance there, and Soviet Russia was involved, and the United States was involved, and there were big effects of a revolution in China and so forth. The effects are more lasting because the war has been largely transferred to the mental plane, where I would say where even today it still rages. The physical effects of war are far more easily obliterated than the mental effects in which we still live. The great question with which hierarchy is faced today: will the race of men succeed in renouncing their present material objectives and so prepare the way for the great revelation? And I suppose the issue is not yet decided. There have been some very promising movements towards that, but then it seems a closing in again and a move towards nationalism, which is egotism on a national scale. The coming of the Christ is not the revelation which is to be recorded, but he will simplify the thinking of men so that a widespread illumination and recognition of the revelation will be possible. So it comes, the revelation, rather later, and Christ must do his work. And this simplified the thinking of men, it must be remembered here that, how does he say it? Simplicity, oops, I want to be where I belong. Simplicity governs the way into Shamballa. The next few years will indicate the way the tide will turn, and whether the reactionary material and selfish forces which have controlled for millennia of years will finally control. Now that is a sort of a harrowing statement. Should we say, meaning that with this decision there is no possibility of change for the better? Well, of course, the next few years. Well, he's writing in 1949, and obviously he was not working with an amanuensis after that point, and simply had to, well, we'll have to wait and see what his assessment is when he starts to write again. This, or, present in some way, I suppose it will be writing, present his views in the third installment of bridging treatises. This reactionary and material spirit taints every department of human life, and the churches are no exception. Problem is a limitation of perception, and this we call materialism. In other words, we have a superficial view of life, and that which the ordinary senses present is deemed as reality, We do not see through, we do not see beyond, we do not give credence to the existence of the subtle worlds. We are insensitive. And I guess I could say this, that insensitivity causes materialism. We have to, under the seventh ray, become far more refined, and then, even though the seventh ray is the ray of the etheric and dense physical plane, in a way, there still will be sufficient sensitivity to detect that which lies beyond the presentation of the normal senses. Humanity can, however, learn its lesson and turn, thankfully, to the way of righteousness and to the hitherto unknown technique of right human relations. It seems so simple, doesn't it? Right human relations. But the golden rule in all religions presents this possibility, but it has never been tried and sustained by humanity as a whole. I seek not to deal in detail with the evil which holds the world in thrall, and think of it, the war was over, and still evil held the world and holds the world. Okay, enough is already known, and a small handful, small by comparison to the many millions of hierarchical workers in all departments of life, are struggling to awaken humanity to the risks they are running and to the finality. To awaken humanity to the risks they are running and to the finality of the decision, which the next two generations will be forced to make, and I suppose we could ask, has that decision been made? Or are we finally in the final years of the era of the Forerunner, making that decision? Well, you know, these are dire things, and threatening in a way, very threatening. Era of the Forerunner. EOF. That's it. Okay, very good. I would first like to point out that quote, number one, the mass of people are sound but ignorant of the higher values, and that can be slowly righted. Let's just say a good foundation exists. They are negative as yet in action and prone to words and not deeds. Well, deeds must come forth. The action is required. Theory must give way to practice. They are easily led and also easily swayed by imparted fears, and this is demagoguery. Did I spell that correctly? This is demagoguery, and it is still rampant today. For instance, in the United States, which is a very sad thing to behold. But then again, as the Tibetan stated, the United States is prone to fascism. And it would be the great irony if that country, which was so instrumental in defeating fascism, succumbed to it. So the mass of people are sound, and this is a good foundation and reassuring. The evil in the world and that which is primarily guilty of swaying the masses at this time is focused through a few powerful men or groups of powerful men. No country is free from this control or from this attempted control. These powerful groups are swayed in turn by the forces of evil, forces which were not sealed in their own place. After all that war, and the apparent triumph, but not a final triumph that was needed, because the plan of love and light and power still lacks positive and worldwide presentation. This we must do in whatever way we can present the divine plan for our planet. The aspirants, number 3, the aspirants, disciples, and spiritual workers of the world are not acting in full concert with the hierarchy. This is, well, it's realistic and maybe a little bit of a dismal view, and it's being written at the very end of his writings. They are swayed by fear, by a sense of futility, and by a too acute understanding of the nature of the forces of evil with which they are confronted. So our cooperation with hierarchy is now indispensable. The picture of what must be accomplished looms too large. There is little organized cooperation among them, and no welding together into a united group for world salvage and service. Now, some of this may have been rectified with the appearance of many cooperative groups. We don't want to exaggerate their effectiveness, but many, many groups for the welfare of humanity have sprung up. We're looking here at a condition which existed at the end of the war, and here it is now. About 70 years later. The spiritual opportunity is, however, emerging with increasing clarity in the minds of thinking men and women, even if it is not expressed by them in orthodox so-called terms or in recognized spiritual terms. So the rising of the United Nations, and of course the simultaneous attempt to quell or quash the good that come from it is still active today. Obviously this egotism which works against group union is still rampant. We have the dictators of the world who see no further than their own power and protection. But anyway, some very, very positive things did occur, and a world consciousness, we might say, a world consciousness furthered by the developing communications system. And we're in the middle of that right now. Of course, that also gives the other side, so to speak, its opportunity. Perhaps a clear statement of that which the active spiritual forces are seeking to bring may prove helpful. If the forces of evil are active and organized, the forces of light are equally active, but not so well organized. This is ever the way, There is discipline in the Black Lodge for its own protection. The basic goal is the freedom, the liberation of mankind. But the spiritual workers are handicapped by the fact that men themselves must make free choice and decision in order to be free. They can only be liberated when, let's see, what do we have here? When they, as individuals and later as groups, liberate themselves from the express thought control of the powerful dominating groups and from the fears which these groups intentionally engender. But let's just say this is the great statement here. The basic goal is freedom and the liberation of mankind. The lords of liberation, and especially the Lord who is especially concerned with liberation, are active. But the spiritual workers must leave men in freedom. This, of course, the Black Lodge never does. They compel, they coerce. So there are powerful thought forms out there which they create, and they dominate those who are easily dominated. Freedom can never be conferred through totalitarian methods, and liberation cannot come through a dictator or dictating groups. This makes, such sense, and when we see the rising of dictatorial tendencies and a refusal to really cooperate, we have a very dire situation. A realization of the manner in which the hierarchical forces are working, and a recognition that all men are today immersed in vital spiritual happenings. So that's us. We are immersed in vital spiritual happenings, may serve to encourage the faithful and give a quickening vision to those who are struggling. On behalf of humanity, the workers who cooperate with hierarchy must be strengthened. What are the 5 spiritual events in which all are consciously or unconsciously participating? And he says, let me list them for you. The crisis of ideologies, number 1. 2, the steady awakening of men everywhere to better understanding. Number 3, the growth of goodwill as it reveals cleavages. 4, the partial sealing of the door where evil dwells. I suppose more had been hoped, and even, really, think of it, the use of the great invocation. These are the 5 spiritual events in which we are either consciously or unconsciously participating. These are the 5 deepest spiritual events happening in the world today. Let's look again. The crisis of ideologies, everywhere contending against each other. The steady awakening of men everywhere to better understanding. I suppose the telecommunication system is going to help very much with that. The growth of goodwill as it reveals cleavages. We didn't know that there were so many divisions. The partial sealing of the door where evil dwells. The door has been left ajar, and we see the results of it even now, and the use of the great invocation. These are the 5 deepest spiritual events happening today. The 2 which lie ahead in the not-too-distant future, but which depend upon humanity availing itself of the present opportunity, is the closer approach of hierarchy and the imminent return of the Christ. And for these 2 groups that are gathered around the Bailey teaching have been working for a long time. Now, he's going to take them one by one, so let's see what he has to say here. The crisis of ideologies. Men are today confronted with conflicting and antagonistic ideologies or schools of thought, and automatically, according to their background, tradition, training, and place of birth even, they regard some one of these ideas as true and all the others as false and wrong. We have seen this, in recent elections involving, in the United States, red states and blue states, and we've seen the fundamentalist Christian group upholding a certain position that is very different from the more liberal and global thinkers. So anyway, the thought is determined by background, tradition, training, and place of birth. They are apt to forget that according to the locale of birth, the national mode of schooling, and the nature of the national propaganda, so will be the chosen ideology or imposed ideology. They do not see widely enough. Very few people are free agents, even in the democracies. I guess, what can we say? We are all conditioned by our circumstances more than we would like to admit. A man born in Central Russia, for instance, knows nothing but communism. He cannot imagine another suitable form of government. So it's a failure also in imagination, in the ability to hold other possibilities than the ones with which one is immediately presented. He cannot imagine another suitable form of government. Again, a man born in the United States or in Great Britain boasts and is pleased that he was born in a democracy, but the accident of birth accounts largely for his attitude. We just do not have that much power over the thought forms present in our locale of birth. Men need to remember these things and not blame each other for the place in which they are born. It seems obvious, doesn't it? We have therefore ideologies and their opponents, great schools of thought and modes of government confronted by organized opposition, and never a broad enough point of view. One basic premise can be laid down. The platform of the leading ideologies is not necessarily wrong or wicked. It is the imposition by force and by a police state of an ideology, and its use by powerful men and groups for their own benefit, plus the keeping of the people in blind ignorance so that no free choice is theirs. This is the wickedness. This is fundamentally wicked and evil. And I suppose there was much of this in the in the days of Stalin and the latter days of Stalin, and even more subtly perhaps in the democracies. But still, we are conditioned and we are not free agents. We don't have that kind of power of mind and power of imagination, so we lack sufficient power of mind and of imagination to be fair in our assessment of the virtues and deficits of various ideologies. And I should learn how to spell that word, right? Okay. There it is. Okay. We have, for instance, a great crisis in the world today presented by the conflicts between communism and a democratic point of view, and really, this has somewhat waned. We see Russia no longer as the kind of communistic threat that it was, and even China has turned towards some mixture. It's apparently a communist country, but with one party, but it's very capitalistic in its outreach, and there's been much progress with various leaders that have turned away from the hardcore communism of Mao, let us say. I mention this first because it is one that is occupying a prominent position in the eyes of all men everywhere. Well, this is back in the late 40s, right? This presents a dominant spiritual opportunity. Interesting. The democratic attitude dedicated as it claims to be to human freedom, however little of that freedom is yet truly attained, is, because of that freedom factor, sponsored by the hierarchy. The hierarchy is working very much towards the expression of freedom, I suppose, under Uranus and away from that Plutonic kind of control, totalitarian control. Communism being an imposed ideology forced on the people by totalitarian authority, meaning they want to see everything the same and uniform, is regarded as evil. It is not the communistic theories which are necessarily wrong. It is the technique and method rampant in the totalitarian lands which are counter to the spiritual plan. Okay. Because in a way, there's much virtue, I suppose, in the sharing which communism represents. If you look at the idea that to each according to his need and from each according to his ability is highly idealistic and nothing evil in it, it would represent quite a selfless state of society which is still far away. Imposed communism and all totalitarian methods imprison the human soul. We forcing all people to believe similarly and act similarly, and certain religions are doing that. Okay, act similarly. Yeah. Imprison the human soul. We have some religions today that are extremely totalitarian in their nature and intolerant of other approaches to what they imagine deity to be. Imprison the human soul and breed fear and hatred everywhere. Should the democratic principles therefore be imposed upon the world or any part of the world by a totalitarian regime, it would be equally wrong. So what is wrong is totalitarian imposition, denying freedom, and all units of life must have freedom to express that part of the divine will which they represent, especially the self-conscious units, the self-conscious units. The other units cannot help but express what they are. These conflicting ideologies are presenting clearly to the human consciousness certain great distinctions. These distinctions are found in techniques and methods far more than in the various tenets. Many of the people most violently fighting communism could not tell you succinctly what those tenets are, but they are fighting, and rightly fighting, the totalitarian methods of cruelty, spying, murder, suppression, lack of freedom. Have those methods been somewhat abandoned? I know that there have been those in the Soviet Union becoming Russia, such as Gorbachev, which apparently who sought to relieve his country of these methods. Are they starting up again? Are they stronger under the present leadership? The battle is not won. What they are doing in truth is fighting the abominable methods of imposing the rule of a few evil and ambitious men upon the ignorant masses under the name of communism. This is what they are fighting. And I suppose this is what we must fight in the field of religion as well. They are fighting the technique of exploiting the ignorant through misinformation, organized lying, and limited education. They are fighting against the sealing up of nations within the confines of their own territory, against the police state, the lack of free enterprise, and the reduction of men and women to automatons. This is the true imprisonment of the human spirit, and this is what must be fought, because anything that denies the expression of the divine in man, his will, bringing that expression forward, must be countered. The situation is, however, so pronounced and the evil so obvious and the human spirit so basically and divinely strong that it will eventually defeat itself. When the present group of totalitarian rulers behind what you call the Iron Curtain die out, a different state of affairs will gradually supervene, and a true communism, in the spiritual sense of the word, will take the place of the present wickedness. Now, Stalin is dead, and those who followed him reformed gradually the system. I don't know if we can say anything like that about the United States. Roosevelt was the great leader, and no one after him really equaled his grasp. He was a great disciple and initiate. On the other hand, the much vaunted democracies have much to learn. Men are not truly free, even in democratic countries. The Negroes, this goes back, of course, and so much progress has been made in that respect. The Negroes, for instance, lack their constitutional rights in parts of the United States. And in South Africa, their educational facilities and their opportunity to work and to live as free men is not equal to those of the white race. Well, here came a great disciple, Nelson Mandela, and through great sacrifice and understanding, the system was changed without great bloodshed. It was a real hierarchical win in that respect. In the southern states, the Constitution of the United States is infringed every day by those who believe in white supremacy, a supremacy which will be put to the crucial test when Africa awakes. And even now, this white supremacy is returning in the expression of certain groups. So, you wonder whether we have really made progress. There has been some amazing civil rights progress, and we certainly see the people of other races having risen to high condition within various countries and in the democracies. And this is now accepted as natural and right. So this is a movement forward. It's no longer the deep South of the 1940s and 50s. This attitude of the United States and their failure to live up to the Constitution where Negroes are concerned have greatly weakened the faith of other countries in the wonder of America, and the situation in South Africa is not honored by thinking men. Well, let's just say great changes have occurred. And think of the civil rights movement and the way that affirmative action has worked, and the lifting up of the black people and the people of other races and so forth into possibilities of real advancement. I mentioned these two situations because there is widespread evil in the democracies, and true house cleaning is sorely needed. We don't want to revert. And some people today think we are perhaps reverting because the last ditch stand of materialism and selfishness is now with us. The imperialism of democratic Britain has badly marred an otherwise fine record on behalf of dependent peoples, but it is rapidly becoming a thing of the past. As Britain gives freedom of choice and democratic liberation to India, Pakistan, Ceylon, and Burma, some of those have changed their names. Each of those liberations was in the nature of a spiritual expansion of consciousness to the British people, and a spiritual opportunity of which only Ceylon and Pakistan show signs of being aware. Well, this goes into the history of the period, and one wonders if it is true any longer. India certainly has advanced tremendously in self-government, and well, there's trouble in Burma, Myanmar, as they call it, and much is to be worked out there in the conflict, which seems strange between the Buddhists. It's a pacifistic religion, and the Islamists, not a pacifistic religion, rather warlike. Always in every department of human living, the spiritual and material aims are making their presence and their difficulties clearly felt. The spiritual issue, as I have lately pointed out to you, is the imprisonment of the human spirit, or its freedom and liberation. And that is the keen discriminator. And by that touchstone, we can judge. But freedom, of course, is not license, and it doesn't mean that the way is cleared for the powerful to trounce the less powerful. True democracy is as yet unknown. It awaits the time when an educated and enlightened public opinion will bring it to power. Well, and this is true today. We have the ideal, and we boast about it in the Western democratic countries, but as he says, we are not yet enlightened in our public opinion, and there are still many conflicts. Towards that spiritual event, mankind is hastening. The battle of democracy will be fought out in the United States. And this we see happening even now, as now certain threats to democracy have appeared in fascist leaning governmental movements. There are people at present, they're the people at present vote and organize their government on a personality basis and not from any spiritual or intelligent conviction. Well, Kennedy's ideals came through, that we are to ask not what our country can do for us, but what we can do for our country. And there have been great efforts under the Great Society Initiative to elevate the minorities. There is a material, selfish aspect to democracy, rampant today, We might put it in this kind of terms. I am free to get what I want. And there is a spiritual aspect, little sought after, but it did emerge in the 60s and 70s. There was a closing off again, I think, in the 80s. There are material and spiritual aspects to communism, but its adherents know them not. And only a ruthless materialism is conveyed to them. So, as usual, it takes a while for humanity to understand. There is again the ideology of socialism, which is regarded by some as a basic evil. Basically, ideally, it is a sharing. Excuse me. Socialism can degenerate into another form of totalitarianism, or it can be more democratic than the present expressions of democracy. And maybe in Europe, we do see that with governments which are democratic social. These issues will emerge clearly in Great Britain, where the socialist point of view is gaining ground among the masses, but which at present is a mixture of nationalization of the public utilities and of free enterprise, a combination which may have true value if preserved. I don't know enough to say whether it has been preserved, but in the United States, any talk of socialism is immediately countered by the selfish interests. There are other ideologies in the political, social, and economic fields, but these with which I have dealt constitute a triangle of schemes undergoing national and political experiments in different countries throughout the world. Hi, friends, and I made a mistake here at about 45 minutes and continued to talk with the volume on mute. So I'm going to pick up right where I left off, and we'll join these together, I think, as a kind of continuation of number 104. So there are other ideologies, okay, and other experiments throughout the world, but the triangle of schemes, is the most important: democracy, communism, and socialism. And that's where the muting began. All of them have religious and a spiritual side. All of them are tainted with materialism, such is the degree of development of humanity presently. And one of them is wickedly totalitarian and is finding followers. Well, certainly in communist China, the followers were found, millions of them. And this was the Stalin regime, communism as it was at that time. Regarding democracy, another is in the throes. Let's see. Yes, another is the victim of the stupid lack of interest of its people. I think we are talking about democracy within the United States, and I don't know if Great Britain is here included, maybe not. Another is in the throes of an experiment which may or may not prove successful. Socialism. Some things are owned by the government and other things are owned privately. In communism, in very strict communism, nothing is owned privately, or very little. Under the impact of these ideologies, the spiritual growth of the human family is fostered. So they are basically good, we might say, good in their highest tenets. Because the emerging spiritual factor under evolutionary law is ever present, even though the form through which it is expressing is wanting. And always there is to be found a tendency towards God and divine expression. So gradually, there will always be improvements in these systems if they are allowed to proceed long enough for the consciousness of the participants, for the consciousness of the participants to rise regarding their nature and present expression. So eventually we see what we're involved in, of course, and we modify it, just as what we used to call Red China, Communist China, has made quite a number of modifications which bring it more into the sphere of nations rather than as a belligerent antagonist to all things Western. So that is why the issue is stressed presently between Christianity and communism, a controversy at that time anyway emphasized by the Roman Catholic Church, but one into which the communistic nations are already drawing the Protestant churches. And we do see this. We see this very much in the evangelical movements, where communism is considered a terrible solution, and the humanity, perhaps, of the communist people is not considered. There have been many modifications, but at the present time, there's a very great standoff between many sects within the Protestant Church and communism, and we saw that all acted out in the Polish Pope and his effect upon the communism of Poland and his effect upon communism in general. It is considered to be godless and atheistic and the enemy of the church, and this is true of many of the Protestant sects as well. But perhaps in Russia today, Christianity and some vestige of communism are flourishing side by side, and if Russia is to be the source of the emergence of the New World religion, as DK says it is, then this will definitely have to be the case. There's a socialistic tendency when we find the seventh ray powerful, and the seventh ray is the soul ray of Russia. We see it also in the Scandinavian countries where the seventh ray is very strong. A socialistic tendency is found. From the standpoints of the hierarchy, these three ideologies are three aspects of one great spiritual event. I guess they're all needed for each other. And the outcome of the interplay between them can eventuate in an increased spiritual approach to divinity, one in which people are truly considered as valuable and one loves one's neighbor. Or if the forces of light do not triumph, and it's still, it's 1949, and the question of their triumph is still in the air, these systems can drive mankind deeper into the pit or prison of materialism. Materialism, the question of how we perceive life and whether we perceive it strictly through the senses or whether we sense there is something far deeper of a subtle nature. So this is being all worked out now in this era of the Forerunner and its latter days. Will we descend into materialism? Already the tendencies are there in the United States and in other places, and the selfish interests are emerging for their last-ditch fight, I suspect. In those days, the intense political interest of the Catholic Church plus its gross materialism, well, political interest comes from its first-ray soul and its gross materialism from its third-ray personality. Those acted as a great handicap to the steady gain of the spiritual position. I remember when I was a young person, I talked to Catholic people, and there were certain books they just couldn't read. They were banned. They were proscribed. They didn't have the freedom of mind to investigate what they wanted to investigate. Of course, all of that has been pretty well given up with the coming of John the 23rd and more liberal forces in the Catholic Church. So now the possibilities, that's what DK is talking about. Now the possibilities, if, however, the Catholic hierarchy can renounce or relinquish its material or political aims and present the love of God, the basic second ray, which must lie behind the whole thing, the love of God in its beauty, it can do much to lead humanity out of darkness into light. And I was saying earlier that two popes especially have attempted to do this, John the 23rd and the present Pope Francis, at least in my estimation. If the United States, here he's pointing the way towards a better future. If the United States can equally renounce its gross materialism, the same gross materialism as the Catholic Church has apparently in those days, and maybe there has been some renunciation, but not necessarily, it can give a lead. I like the way, right? It can give a lead to the world along spiritual lines which will be beyond anything yet demonstrated, and aided by Great Britain, the two great democracies expressing right human relations and the fellowship of man can do great things for the race. These are the potentials, and remember that we have the second ray soul of both the United States and Great Britain. That's correlated with the ray of the Christ, the ray of love wisdom, the ray of the planetary soul, the ray that is emerging with the reappearance of the Christ. So the potentials are definitely there. Great Britain is learning a sense of values. It has a Taurus personality. Venus is strong. Venus rules values. And being drawn away from materialism through great privation because they sacrificed so much in World War II that they impoverished themselves at that time. It is hoped that notice she, I guess because it's the second ray soul, will consciously renounce materialism And Great Britain, let's just say, Great Britain, okay, has a, oh, that's Great Bear, has a, how about it, a more conscious approach than the U.S. At that time and even now. So it's a more mature nation, more thoughtful, fairer in a way, less swept by emotion because the sixth ray is not strong, with its motto, I serve. So the great enemies of humanity at this time, materialism and totalitarianism, these are the great enemies of the freedom of the human spirit. And then he goes on to say, I would like to remind you here that the spiritual hierarchy of our planet cares not whether a man is a Democrat, a socialist, a communist, whether he is a Catholic, a Buddhist, or an unbeliever of any kind. These are great souls. The hierarchy is filled with great souls who can see into the individual, see into the group, see what they really are spiritually, looking at the inner vehicles and their development. The outer forms can, all of them, be transformed to express the inner reality. The great souls of the hierarchy care only that humanity as a whole avail itself of spiritual opportunity, which has certainly been present in the era of the Forerunner, but the question is it now being eclipsed by the counteraction of the selfish interests? The battle is on. It is an opportunity which is present today in a more compelling way than ever before. So, really it's humanity first. It's not any one nation first. It's not Deutschland über alles. It's not America first. It's the human race as a unity, which must be put first, and the welfare of all peoples, with the nations as methods of bringing about that welfare and not exalting themselves in some egotistical fashion. Well, okay, that's number one of these five great spiritual events, and I was trying to move ahead rapidly. And as a result, made a great muting of myself, and had to pick up the problem and correct it. Now, the next thing is man's awakening to a better understanding. I mean, certainly as man matures, we can think that would happen. The general effect of the clashing ideologies and the result of the war among the world religions has started men thinking in every land. The church has failed, masonry has failed, our great institutions have failed. They've prevented us from going into brutal, destructive wars. So these clashing ideologies, whether it's communism, National Socialism at the time, which is a form of fascism, I guess, and democracy, monarchy, all of these have been contending. Men are emerging out of the mental lethargy, I guess. Pain does that to us, forces us to think, which has characterized them for so long. The man of the street today is thinking, pondering, wondering, planning, and deciding. The man of the street, average humanity, we might say, non-aspiring humanity in the spiritual sense, but humanity that is growing in its quality. In past centuries, it was only those who had benefited by education and those in the, quote, upper brackets who thought and planned. This tendency of thought indicates the coming into activity of a new and better civilization and is preparatory to spiritual events of a major importance. In other words, humanity is rising in thought, and a new civilization can come in as a result. Okay. Rising. Right. The spirit of man, usually unconsciously, is driving towards a more spiritual civilization and culture. This the forces of materialism are making another attack now, but this we have seen emerging, and it will emerge. I did not say towards a more religious expression of truth. I'm thinking of the AA program, where they definitely have helped millions and distinguished between spirituality and religion. A more spiritual interrelation is on its way, and the establishing on a worldwide scale of right human relations indicates this. This was, the time of the emerging of the United Nations with all of its hopefulness. We shall have eventually a spiritual focusing, which will be divorced from the present orthodox religions, but which will be in tune with the hidden spiritual factor in all religions, because behind so many of the religions, not necessarily all, is a great spiritual impulse which has condensed, become concretized in the religions, become dogmatic. Outer forms have taken the place of that inner spiritual livingness. Men are not in reality looking for the Christ to come as a religious leader. They look for him to come to them in the field of their greatest need, to point the way to resurrection, a rising up of the inner qualities of man, and the revelation which will inevitably follow man's renunciation of spiritual values. Here in this last sentence, DK has put together quite a number of things that he has been discussing along the way. Christ comes not necessarily as a religious leader at all, but to meet the needs of humanity along the 7 Ashramic lines, to point the way to a rising up of human potential and capability. And the revelation follows renunciation. So revelation, how about that? Revelation follows conscious renunciation. This is the way it is. The prevalent spirit of expectancy. Okay, get rid of some of this stuff, huh? The prevalent spirit of expectancy and of a truly divine discontent, not just the ordinary selfish divine discontent, but a truly divine discontent. People are sick of so many religious pronouncements that just hold their mind in prison, and this tendency has certainly evolved during the last 70 years. The prevalent spirit of expectancy and of truly divine discontent are the guarantees that this second spiritual event is a real factor of our time, and that is humanity's greater understanding. Many factors contribute to this awakening in most countries. Well, look at the internet now. But in those days, through the radio, through the newspapers, books, magazines, travel, lectures, and forums, and simplified human intercourse, to which the automobile and the airplane have greatly contributed, men everywhere are free to know and to understand, and it's even more so now. We are everywhere on the internet simultaneously, and the whole global happening is all under the eye, anyone's eye, that has the equipment, and is not being censored, where the internet is censored. This is, of course, not true of those countries where the freedom of the human spirit is attacked, and, at that time, the communist countries. There are two ways in which that freedom of choice can be infringed. First, as in Russia, by keeping the citizenry in ignorance of world affairs, and second, by giving them biased news and information, or a garbled or distorted slant on world affairs, as is the case in most other countries, particularly the United States. So the news given is not sound, distorted. So there is repression and distortion. These are the two factors which can infringe freedom of choice, suppression, and distortion. And of course, that distortion, or let's call it misinformation. And really, that has been emerging lately in our discourse as fake news, and people hired on the internet to lie and mislead. And, the devil is coming back, the devil, the father of lies. And we've seen so much of it. We will have to see whether we side with truth. The possibility of a truthful perception is emerging. An instance of this can be seen in the fact, now this is going back some time, that the Arabs never got a true hearing in the American newspapers or in the radios. The American people were pressured, I think that's the word you use, into an acceptance of the Zionist position, the motive being oil and mineral riches. So DK sees these events as they really were, and the Arab population was poorly represented. Well, probably there were not many people at that time who thought that that was the case because of the pressure the news put upon them. Only one point of view, and that probably has much to do with the karma of a kind of Old Testament oriented Christianity and its relationship to Judaism. It's ancient karma working out and causing great cleavages, and the reaction of the Arabs over these many decades. But the mentality of man is developing, daily developing, and his ability to grasp world affairs is growing, and this is going to be rapid indeed with the internet, very rapid with the internet. And this is one of the greatest of spiritual events. It is the foundational fact which makes the life of the soul and the growth of intuitive perception possible on a large scale. So this is really a widespread enhancement of education, not just in certain institutions, but in general. A greater grasp of what's really happening and the opening up of the mind. This all is a byproduct of the clash of ideologies, but is the true and beautiful result of universal educational system. And that, of course, we want to move for that, and under the second ray we will move for a universal educational system, faulty though it is and may be, though it may be and is, has made possible for all men to read, to write, and communicate with each other. So education promotes this second spiritual event, the greater understanding of humanity, growing understanding of humanity. Now, I'm really going to do my best not somehow to turn off the microphone. That would be such a waste of time. Now, here is the third of the great spiritual events. It's called the growth of goodwill and the revelation of cleavages. I guess when there is prominent love in the consciousness, those things that work towards separation and the prevention of love are revealed. The result of the world war of disease, famine, and pain has developed a spirit of community and suffering, maybe in anticipation of the fellowship of Christ's sufferings, which true disciples share in. So it's developed a spirit of community and suffering and in deprivation. The old saying is misery loves company, but when you are all suffering together, somehow you realize more clearly why it has happened and perhaps the way through. Developed a spirit of community and suffering and in deprivation. This has led to a consequent understanding, participation, more compassion, right, in human difficulties everywhere, which is rapidly changing into a spirit of goodwill. So participation in suffering and compassion and goodwill arising as a means of expression. Love in action. DK has promoted, through the Lucis Trust, the world goodwill. It's a principle which must spread widely, right? This worldwide goodwill, when truly established and correctly organized, and that's the thing, not just the spontaneous feelings that arise, but a true organizing of the approach of goodwill, is the needed preliminary to revelation. That's really interesting. So, revelation does not come without the preparation which goodwill provides. And for this coming revelation, it will be a planetary revelation shared by all men everywhere, and not before the Christ reappears. We've been shown that what he does will lead humanity to the correct revelation. Okay, unitedly all men realize even today the need to rise out of the prison of self-interest into the freedom of shared opportunity, and this is a kind of resurrection of a kind. And the factor which will bring about this resurrection is goodwill. I guess I'm always one sentence ahead of the Tibetan, probably because I've read it before. But anyway, we have to rise. Humanity must rise in its consciousness, in its capabilities, in its potencies. We are much more than we think and can do much more. As the Christ said, greater things shall ye do than I do. And of course, everybody has considered that to be a very strange statement, because the Christ was the great miracle worker. And we do not feel that within ourselves we have that potential. One interesting aspect of goodwill is that as it develops in human consciousness, it first of all brings a revelation of the existent cleavages which distinguish the political, religious, and social and economic life of the people everywhere. So many people are blind to this still, and shows they are not actuated by goodwill. I mean, we have in our political system people really taking advantage of weaker people and thinking it's quite okay, and don't even notice that it's a cleavage. It's the natural order of things, they think. Kind of a social Darwinism. The revelation of a cleavage is ever accompanied, for such is the beauty of the human spirit, by efforts along all possible lines to bridge or heal that cleavage. So we have, the heart of humanity is sound. This is what heart of humanity is sound and beautiful. This is testified to by the thousands of groups and organizations working to end cleavages and to pull down the barriers to right human relationships. And now there are even more than at that time. That these efforts may be faulty and fruitless is often of less importance than the fact that the attempts to heal, to help, and to establish right human relations are everywhere being made. Okay, so the Christ spirit is affecting humanity, even unconsciously. Modern psychology is an evidence of this. Fourth ray psychology, really, under the fourth ray and second ray, dealing as it does with the problem of integration of the human being and the healing of cleavages of his nature. So all of us have to go through this, must go through this integration before there can be true soul infusion and liberation. And in the United States and in the Western democracies, a strong movement towards the development of the new psychology, which is often transpersonal psychology, and taking into consideration the higher factors of the human being through Assagioli, through Carl Jung, and through many, many followers in more recent times. One of the first things to be done is to educate the individual in the necessity to have goodwill, not only to his fellow men, but also to himself. This is interesting and somehow important because, the instrument must be used The emphasis of medieval Christianity upon weakness, wickedness, and the innate sinfulness of the human being has today to be offset by a true appreciation of divinity in the human form. So it is no sign of spiritual power, spiritual attainment, to hate the vehicles with which one has been endowed for the expression of one's inner divinity. So the idea of a healthy self-respect and a self-love, which is not selfish, if we can imagine such a thing. It is not possible to list the cleavages which represent men's failure to establish and hold good and decent relationships with their fellow men. There are just so many, right? There are today cleavages between man and man, group and group, and also between religions and between nations. And this is the bad effect of the fifth ray when unillumined by the higher mind. The terminology which would express good relations instead of these already exists. And terminology is important because it gives human beings a handle. It gives them an anchor to express certain energies. Union, united, league, federation, commonwealth, right understanding, kindness, human welfare, and many similar terms. Okay. Well, we certainly see at the moment quite a resistance among some who haven't learned any better to repudiate these terms, maybe use them in a selfish way and casting other human beings aside. Selfish groups can be in union, they can be united, they can be in league, they can be federated, and so forth. But they do not look for human welfare. They do not have kind methods. And they are resurging. I think a lot of the people involved in fascistic tendencies have been reborn, and they're trying to perpetuate an ideal, an ideology which was not yet, which they could not achieve in their past incarnation. So these are very positive terms, says the Tibetan. They mean as yet but little, but someday, however, they will stand for certain substantial realities, but that day is not immediate, so we are working our way, someday, not immediate. So, okay, let me get this straight. We are working our way into love and wisdom, and this is the great event upon our planet. All of these other events are somehow subsumed in the great reappearance of the Christ, the externalization of his hierarchy. The concept of easier, unified, and happy relations is nevertheless existent in the minds of many thousands everywhere, and the factual reality will materialize someday, and I suppose during the Age of Aquarius, and especially during the Era of Brotherhood, which under Venus rules the last approximately 720 years of the Aquarian Age. The first step is the wholesome recognition that cleavages do exist. We cannot pretend that everything is rosy when it's not. It is here that goodwill can do its most useful and necessary work. I do not intend here to stress the nature of that work or state how it should be carried forward. That I have already done many times. It is the cultivation of a spiritual attitude that is needed. Spiritual attitude, not just a religious attitude, which is so often full of separateness and cleavage, and the dedication at all times and in every possible way to the will to good. There is a great objective. The will to good takes us there. We have to think about that, the will to manifest the good on earth and on all personality levels. The majority of existing cleavages are now recognized. The delay comes in the task of bridging them and also in shouldering responsibility. We see, but will we do? Okay? We see, but will we do to help in the process of bridging? Many nations, and especially the USSR and USA, are prompt to adjudicate blame, let's just say, as their sixth ray personalities incline them to do, to point out errors and to advise other nations what is wrong and how to put it right. That's so much the sixth ray, the glamour of being holier than thou and having the right position, whereas someone else has the wrong one. They both need to clean house themselves and attend to the righting of the wrongs within their own what? Within their own borders. The same is true of all nations, but the others are not so openly engaged in telling other people what they should do. This is humorous, if it weren't sadly the case. Why, for instance, should the USA deal with the problem of the Indonesian strife and seek to force the Dutch to do what Americans feel should be done, and at the same time give not constitutional aid to the just cause of the Negro minority within the United States? And this has persisted. I'm recalling, that Putin has been speaking of what right the United States, with its constant slaughter through the possession of guns by those who shouldn't have them, what right have they to point to situations in other countries which are brutal or undesirable? We have a very brutal situation when we can witness the slaughter of hundreds through the possession of attack rifles, kind of weapons that are meant only for war. What right have we to lecture others? But that is the way of the sixth ray, and the presently and still the personality of the United States rules, and this is so for Russia as well. Why accuse other nations of constant wrongdoing, as does Russia, and of breaking treaties when Russia fails on all points to keep her word or cooperate in the righting of world affairs? Well, this is, what do we have here? Really, we have hypocrisy and projection. And why do we speak of the mote in the eye of the other when we do not recognize the beam in our own eye? But this takes it can only be outgrown through a more mature psychological approach. And many of our leaders are not psychological at all. They are simply jockeying for advantage, and they do not see their own character and how it contributes to the problem. The task which the hierarchy wishes to see accomplished at this time is the spread of goodwill. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Love in action, the spread of love, the spread of love in action. Each person, community, and nation should begin with a diagnosis of their own attitude towards goodwill and then set an example by eliminating cleavages in the home, in the business, and nation. I've sometimes seen those television shows about the boss who goes undercover as an ordinary employee, talks to the employees, understands whether they have goodwill towards the company and all the sacrifices they are making, and maybe understands others who are a source of disunion. Anyway, it's usually related to those who are sacrificially and helpfully working, and they are rewarded by the undercover boss. It can be very, very moving because it's like playing the part of Santa Claus and granting wishes which the employees never thought could possibly come to them. Very moving, really. Goodwill is contagious. Once a definite start has been made in a pure and disinterested spirit, goodwill will permeate the world and right human relations will be rapidly established. Was it Master Moria who said the time will come when men compete to see how much good they can do rather than the mischief of selfishness? The healing of cleavages is a practical matter. The spirit of synthesis working through the great first ray avatar, the avatar of synthesis, is closer to the earth than ever before, and the clarity which will emerge in the light of his presence is already available. So the avatar of synthesis here in the late 40s was having his great effect, and certainly we have undergone great synthesis. We have, as humanity, undergone a great synthesis through our computer revolution. The tendency to integration can therefore be more easily fostered, and a new synthesis attained among men. Not just a unity is good enough in many ways, but realizing that we are all somehow deeply identical. Before, however, integration and synthesis are possible, this first ray energy must work to destroy all that prevents integration and all that is hindering the needed synthesis. There will be revelation through love, and then the necessary destruction of that which is revealed. So fifth ray and first ray are related. There will be revelation of cleavages through love, and then the destruction of fifth ray cleavages by the first ray. Human beings themselves must also destroy the prejudices, the animosities, and the fixed ideas which have prevented synthesis and which have created cleavages and hindered right understanding. I saw an article the other day, or maybe it was more a video, of a black man who frequently goes to talk to members of the Ku Klux Klan. And he does it on a person-to-person basis, basically asking, why do you hate me? And his method is so harmless that somehow the other begins to see him as a human being and cares for him. He has been gifted with much Ku Klux Klan regalia, robes and all the rest of it, because the men he has spoken to have left the Klan for good. And, you know, for good means finally, but also for good. So he certainly is a disciple, you know, a member of the new group of world servers, and very brave and very successful in meeting human being to human being. Well, let's, all right, so that was the third great spiritual event, and that was the, let's see, what was it? The growth of goodwill. and the revelation of cleavages. Before that, the growth of understanding. Excuse me. And before that, why does my memory not hold here? The crisis of ideologies. Crisis of ideologies, growth of understanding, and the expression of goodwill. Now, there's a little bit more to go here before, the 5 great spiritual events. Here they are, the crisis of ideologies, the steady awakening of men everywhere to better understanding, promoted by our amazing telecommunications system and computers, the growth of goodwill as it reveals cleavages, and then the partial sealing of the door where evil dwells. So let's get to that, because of my mistake where I'm talking on mute. I have no idea how long this will be, this particular. Yeah. Let's see how long it is. Okay. And the use of the great invocation. Yeah. So powerful. But let's go back here, the partial sealing of the door where evil dwells. Just what do these words mean? Well, more than I can tell you or put into words, for the problem of evil is too difficult a one for the average man to grasp. I think we have to be dealing with cosmic conditions, It deals with cosmic circumstances and conditions. The problem of the hierarchy, if I may put it both accurately and yet symbolically, is to liberate the good, free the beautiful, and release the true, and immure in prison under seal that which is not good, that which breeds ugliness and hate, and that which distorts the truth or lies about the future. This is an amazing statement. I'm not remembering it now, but it's really powerful. And let's repeat it. Excuse me. The power of the hierarchy, if I may put it both accurately and yet symbolically, is to liberate the good. Each one of these words is significant. Free the beautiful, release the true, and immure in prison under seal, seal the door where evil dwells, immure in prison under seal, behind a wall, immure, that which is not good, that which breeds ugliness and hate, and that which distorts the truth and lies about the future. We see all these things going on. I've chosen all these words with care. Their meaning is obvious, but there are significances far too deep and dangerous for you to grasp. Well, he told us that speculation anent the Black Lodge is both profitless and dangerous. I suppose certain specifics regarding the Black Lodge. It has been humanity, cumulatively and over millions of years, which has released evil into the world, and, the humanity from the previous solar system, among which the Black Lodge initiates are found, being particularly active in this release. Thoughts of hate, deeds of cruelty, lying words, sadistic action, selfish intentions, and the foulest kind of ambitious selfishness have created a pathway to the door where evil dwells. And that can be systemic or even, that can be systemic or even cosmic. Cosmic evil has been involved on Earth, and it's far more difficult to deal with than planetary evil. Evil is in reality of two kinds. There is that innate tendency to selfishness and to separation which is inherent in the very substance of our planet. Of it, all forms are made, and our planetary logos inherited it from the residue left over from a previous solar system. Let's just say, trying to redeem the third ray of the previous solar system. Yes, it's this we might call in a way planetary evil. That is something unavoidable and something that provides mankind with a needed opportunity. Saturn is involved here, and one with which men are well equipped to handle and control. There is that in them which can transmute and change it, and it is this that basically constitutes the science of redemption. So this is what you might call a natural evil appearing under the prevailing systemic and cosmic conditioning. Yeah. So that we have something we can counter. Within us, we have something which can counter this. But humanity has not chosen to exert itself in this redemptive activity, and for thousands of years has been controlled by that which is material. It has thus constructed the broad and easy way which leads to the place where another kind of evil dwells, an evil which is not indigenous to our planet, an evil with which it was never intended that men should deal. Well, that's quite a statement. We've brought upon ourselves through our negligence a greater danger. For untold eons, the hierarchy has stood like a shield guarding humanity. But with the coming of a greatly increased mental development, with the repudiation of hierarchy by the bulk of humanity, going back millennia, and by the prostitution of religion to material ends and narrow theological and mental tenets, the hierarchy has been forced, much against its will, to withdraw some measure of its protecting power, though not all of it, fortunately, for mankind. Well, there are laws here, and it's just not possible for hierarchy to do everything for humanity. We would become weaklings if that were the case, as Master Moria reminds us. The way to the door where evil dwells was unimpeded, and humanity opened wide the door. Let's just say, due to its negligence and refusal to deal with the evil with which it could actually deal. The entrance for what might be regarded as cosmic evil was first opened in the decadent days of the Roman Empire, maybe not at first, which was one of the reasons why the Christ chose to manifest in those days, was opened wider under the corrupt regime of the kings of France, and in our own day has been opened still wider by evil men in every land, and certainly by the Axis powers, with Germany being the worst. So these are the three modern openings to the cosmic evil, and maybe in Atlantis something of this happened as well, because there were some terrible abuses that occurred at that time. Remember that the evil to which I refer here is not necessarily the foul and vile things about which people speak with bated breath. These are largely curable, and the processes of incarnation eventually purify them. The true nature of cosmic evil finds its major expression in wrong thinking, false values, and the supreme evil of materialistic selfishness and the sense of isolated separativeness. This is how he's defining cosmic evil, and not the kind of sensationalistic evil which is curable. The true nature of cosmic evil finds its major expression in wrong thinking, false values, and look at this, the supreme evil of materialistic selfishness. It's under the third ray, I fear. Very sad. And returning returning to see if it can conquer, and the sense of isolated separativeness, pride, separativeness, and cruelty, the three mental heads of the Hydra, and this is due to humanity's advancement. No, not that. Okay. These, to speak again in symbols, are the weights which keep the door of evil open and which precipitated upon the world the horrors of war, which its attendant disasters, the great war, aided and abetted by the forces of cosmic evil. Not just the kind of ignorance that humanity is subject to due to its inheritance and material conditions. The realization of what was happening did more temporarily to unify the world and heal the cleavages among nations than any other thing. The realization of this cosmic evil. It might not have been called cosmic by those who realized it, but it was considered to be horrific. The nations of the world allied themselves with the forces of light to a very great extent, and little by little, cosmic evil was forced back. And the door which, and here these are powerful statements, conceals the place of endless death and hides the countenances of the lords of wicked pride and hateful lust, was partially closed. Those are strong words, aren't they? Amazingly strong words. Partially closed. So humanity realized that it was being attacked by a type of evil that was difficult to understand in its amazing cruelty. And they did band together with the forces of light, the allies, so to speak, fighting the Axis powers in those days, and drove the cosmic evil back wherever this door is located. I mean, is it the cosmic astral plane, or is it the expression of this cosmic astral evil on the systemic astral plane in the place called Marakara? Because in a way humanity cannot reach, the cosmic astral plane and those high cosmic ethers. So anyway, it drove evil back out of the ethers and partially sealed the door which conceals the place of endless death and hides the countenances of the lords of wicked pride and hateful lust. It was partially closed, but not entirely shut. Its final closing and sealing is not yet accomplished, and I suppose it was hoped. It was hoped that it could be, but it was not, and evil in humanity proves very resistant to the final closing of the door. There are certain areas of evil in the world today through which the forces of darkness can reach humanity. What they are and where they are, I do not intend to say. Because this might only strengthen them. And isn't it interesting that DK here, in some of the last things he's writing, is dealing with the problem of evil. It is a stern reminder of where we stand. Of course, the unconscious leaders, they know nothing of what they are really doing in the larger scheme of things, and we have to work interiorly to offset what they are doing. I would point out, however, that Palestine should no longer be called the Holy Land. Its sacred places are only the passing relics of three dead and gone religions. Well, people are not going to be happy about that. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, all dead and gone. Of course, there are interior factors in all those religions which are very beautiful, and maybe they can be preserved. The spirit, however, has gone out of the old faiths, and the true spiritual light is transferring itself into a new form which will manifest on earth eventually as the new world religion. So, it's quite dead, and yet the people who adhere to these dead and gone religions, dead and gone, wow, believe that these religions are the only way to God. Astonishing. But one has to have a certain freedom of thought in order to work one's way free of concluding that one's dead and gone religion is the only proper religion for the world. So anyway, there will be eventually a new world religion. Russia may well be the original source of this, because it's a scientific invocatory religion. Excuse me. To this form, all that is true and right and good in the old forms will contribute. For the forces of right will withdraw that good and incorporate it into the new form. Well, this is what I was trying to hint at. Judaism is old, obsolete, and separative, and has no true message for the spiritually minded, which cannot be better given by newer faiths. The Muslim faith has served its purpose, and all true Muslims await the coming of the Imam Mahdi, who will lead them to light and spiritual victory. Spiritual victory, if they are true Muslims. And of course, that's not the popular approach at the moment. With the Sharia law and normative Islam. It's not the true Islam of a deeply mystical kind, which has a great deal of love within it, and which often the Sufis express. The Christian faith has also served its purpose. Its founder, I guess, Master Jesus, is it? Seeks to bring a new gospel and a new message that will enlighten all men everywhere. Therefore, Jerusalem stands for nothing of importance today, except for that which has passed away and should pass away. And yet, look at the battles. Look at the battles. Now, I'm writing this even as the United States, through its president, has declared Jerusalem the capital, eternal capital of Israel. The Holy Land is no longer holy, but is desecrated by selfish interests and by a basically separative and conquering nation, and this is first-ray Israel, and we understand the Tibetans' point of view on this, so vigorously rejected by many of his Jewish students. The task ahead of humanity is to close the door upon this worst and yet secondary evil, and to shut it in its own place, immuring it behind that wall. Seal the door where evil dwells. Well, this is the task. It's a secondary evil, but extremely powerful, and should not be affecting mankind. It has its own redemptive task to deal with, based upon the conditions of unredeemed matter from the moon chain and from the previous solar system. There is enough for humanity to do in transmuting planetary evil without undertaking to battle with that which the masters themselves can only, keep at bay? Let's see. Can only, keep at bay. All right. Well, that's true. I mean, why undertake that which is impossible of achievement? So we can deal with planetary evil, but not with the cosmic evil, and that is what the restoration of true values will bring for us, and the cessation of materialism and the great explosion of the atomic bomb is said to be the death knell of that type of materialism. The masters cannot conquer it. That's how powerful it is. The handling of this type of evil and its dissipation, and therefore the release of our planet from its danger is the destined task of those who work and live in the center where the will of God is known at Shamballa. The masters can't handle it, but only keep it at bay. It must be extremely powerful. It is not the task of the hierarchy or humanity. Now remember this. Remember this, but remember also that what man has loosed, he can aid to imprison. He's chosen this broad way of neglect, which opened the door to cosmic evil, but he can help to imprison it again. This he can do by fostering right human relations, by spreading the news of the approach of the spiritual hierarchy, and preparing for the reappearance of the Christ. So these are our methods of combating cosmic evil. These are our methods of combating cosmic evil. Forget not also, the Christ is a member of the Great Council of Shamballa, I suppose as all 7th-degree Shohans would be, and brings the highest spiritual energy with him, supported by the three great beings, the intraplanetary avatars, Avatar of Synthesis, Spirit of Peace, and also the Buddha in Shambhala. Humanity can also cease treading the path to the door where evil dwells, and can remove itself and seek the path which leads to light and to the door of initiation. Yeah. Well, this is what we can do. These are our potentials if we care enough to enact them and are cognizant enough of the clear and present dangers of the present situation. So, seal the door where evil dwells, and that, what's the word? Immure in prison under seal that which is not good, which breeds ugliness and hate, that which distorts the truth and lies about the future. Serious business, isn't it? Serious business. And we can be very grateful to the Tibetan for alerting us to the seriousness of the situation with which we are engaged and in which we stand. Well, I'll tell you what, this is a long one, and I'm eager to correct my mistake. So let's just say that this is, let's call this the end, end of Raised Initiation Webinar Commentary number 104, continuation. On this day of the 19th of December, 2017, and the last one of these 5 spiritual events is the giving out of the Great Invocation. I'll take that on by itself. So, beginning of Raise and Initiation Webinar Commentary number 105, and when that will be, I'm not sure. This is up to page 755. Okay, well, we start at 755, and we don't know exactly. And here we end it at 755. Page whatever, and ending at 755, and going back, let's see where we started when I made that mistake about the 3 democracy, communism. So this was, what page is it? 747. Okay. Somehow I'll get this through to you, and in somehow the right way. Okay, 747. All right. All right, friends, then I'll continue a little later. And we're grateful to the Tibetan for providing us with what he considers to be the 5 major spiritual events in the modern world, because that can adjust our sense of values. Okay. I trust that this will work, and let's go.